and welcome to my channel. My name is Lily and I want to talk about my autism diagnosis, how I got there, and kind of what it means to me. Initially, I approached the NHS in Scotland, where I'm living, about getting therapy because I had issues with depression and anxiety. And they had a very, very long waiting list. So what I did partway into my waiting time, they had this kind of initial assessment at which I was kind of going in and talked to a psychologist, and they were just kind of like talking to me about what I'm going to need from therapy. During this talk, I kind of explained what was going on in my life, how I got to where I was, kind of what I wanted to talk through. And the psychologist that assessed me was like, "Have you ever been assessed for autism before?" And I said, "What? Autism? Me? No, never." So some of the situations and issues I had brought up were actually indicators of autistic traits or issues that were very common in women with autism. And he kind of picked up on that at this very first time we met, and he assessed me. He offered that I could be assessed for autism when it came time for my therapy to start, and I agreed because I think on a certain level, I guess I was curious about it as well. The next step for me was just waiting, because as I said before, the waiting list was really long, and I think I had about a year left to wait before my therapy would actually start. At the same time, I was busy doing my PhD, and I'm telling you now, this was very difficult. And I'm going to talk a bit about what it's like being neurodivergent while doing a PhD as well in a different video. But as of right now, I was doing my PhD and I was waiting, and eventually I got to talk to another student from the university who was also autistic and who told me that the university had actually helped them get assessed. So I kind of looked into that, and indeed, the support services at my university offered an assessment for different things, not just autism specifically. However, what they were offering was what they called an educational diagnosis, so it's not an official clinical one. And essentially, the thought behind that is that would be much faster than getting an official clinical diagnosis, and also it allowed the university to tailor specific support to those people that have specific issues. And because I was kind of struggling, I was like, you know what, why not? Go in, do it, see what happens. And I got my assessment really fast indeed. As expected, it wasn't as thorough as a clinical assessment would have been, but it was very helpful to find out where my struggles were and to kind of get another indicator that there are signs of autism in my behavior and in my kind of life until then. So in the next step, I was still waiting for the clinical assessment with the NHS, but I had gotten my assessment with the university, and they did this fantastic job of starting to support me right away. I got automatically an appointment with support services. They helped me set up certain things that would help me in my studies. And ultimately, it really helped me to continue my PhD and feel a lot more relaxed about the whole situation. Why this step was important for me was because it kind of reiterated for me, okay, there really is something there and it's probably worth looking into, because suddenly with just a tiny bit of support, I was able to thrive. You know, I was able to work really well, much better than I had ever been before. So for me, it was very important to actually go through with the actual assessment as well. Eventually my weight was up and I started therapy, and the first thing we did was actually start this assessment. And I think I was really lucky with the psychologist that was working with me, with my therapist. She is fantastic. She listened to what I had to say and she listened to me. And I think that was very important in order for me to be truthful about my situation and how I'd grown up and what I was thinking. So the assessment lasted several sessions, but we weren't just doing the assessment, we were also talking about issues in everyday life and kind of a little bit already starting to work through it. And as expected, there were questionnaires for people in my social circle. For example, my husband filled one in, my younger sister, and one I filled out, but with the help of my mum, because I had to ask her about like certain milestones and such that I achieved as a child and when. So one of the things that I often read online in forums, but that I was also a little bit worried about, was what if those questionnaires filled out by others don't accurately show my situation and then you're not getting your diagnosis. in my case, I brought this up with my therapist because it was something I was insecure about, but I felt secure enough with her to ask her this question. And she said that for her, it was most important what came from me, and everything else was kind of like a bonus, some extra information. However, she would take what I'm saying into account, and that was what weighted the most. And I think that's very important because especially women with autism are very good at masking. So we are very good at hiding our symptoms, hiding our tics or whatever else, you know, that's typically autistic that we would be doing otherwise. And we are very good at this from very early on. We're learning that very, very early on as children already. So I think this was very important to know that she was believing me and rather how I felt than how other people perceived me. We went through questionnaires as well, of course. So she asked me lots of questions, and a lot of these questionnaires were kind of these like yes and no questions. You know, do you do this? Do you believe this? And things like that. And a lot of those questions come across as being really stupid. For example, do you understand sarcasm? And it's like, well, of course I understand sarcasm, mostly. And it very much depends on the situation. And this was something that I found very important because my therapist really made a point of explaining that that is the case. It often depends on a situation. Another example I have is routine. My day is not the same routine every day. However, I have what I call micro routines in which there are different like small things throughout the day that I always do the same. For example, the way I shower is always the exact same way. I do every single step. You know, like when do I wash my hair and how do I wash my hair and these kind of things. That's always exactly the same. And if you disturb that, or I forget a step or something, I get very confused. How we act can change from situation to situation. Another thing for me, for example, is I am uncomfortable with unwanted attention on myself. So the attention is accidental, or somebody else puts the attention on me without me being prepared for it. On the other hand, I am very comfortable with being on a stage and performing because this is something that I practiced, and I don't have an issue with that because I know what's going to happen. So that's not really an issue. So if you just ask me if I'm uncomfortable with the attention being on me, then I would have to say, well, it depends on the situation. And this was the case for all of these questionnaires where we went through them question by question, and for every question my therapist took notes about the context of the question. And I thought this was so important for my diagnosis. Eventually, I got my diagnosis from my therapist as well, so now it's an official NHS diagnosis that I am autistic. As you may have noticed, I'm already a bit older, so I got my diagnosis well, I was between like 29 and 30 years old, and that is quite late. This isn't actually that uncommon for women. Either way, being diagnosed late has some implications as well. It means that there's been a lot going on in my life in the past that was due to being autistic, and I needed to learn that there was a new truth to everything. I really disliked myself. I was often told I wasn't a likable person growing up, and I took that for face value and I started believing it. The new truth that I'm trying to get used to is that I wasn't a bad person, I was a different person. I expressed myself differently. I still do. I express myself differently. And sometimes my brain just works in a different way from others. This is something that I'm needing to learn and accept about myself, and it has been a lot harder than I expected. There's also a bit of grief going on where I feel if I had been diagnosed as a child and had gotten the support I needed, maybe I would have suffered less. But I'm going to talk about that in a different video in more detail. Finally, through both the university actually and my therapist, I was able to get into contact with an organization that I found insanely helpful, and that's Swan Scotland. This organization is for women and non-binary autistic people, specifically adults. Ultimately, they provide a safe space, and we members are able to share our experiences being autistic. So to summarize, I'm a late diagnosed autistic woman, and that comes with its own issues and things to think about that are unexpected and difficult to deal with. However, I'm ready to roll with it, and if I can help anyone else in the process, that'd be even better. So feel free to ask me any questions, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.